friend of mine posted a survey, I guess, if you will, on Facebook the other day about what your favorite worship song is. And I think he was a little bit surprised to find that overwhelmingly was what most people said. You know, there's a lot of fun stuff on the radio and a lot of good new stuff, but the words of that song are just powerful. God's grace is amazing, and I'm so thankful for that. Anybody recognize that logo? Some of you may recognize it, but you don't want to admit it. You know, growing up in the Memphis side of the state, in West Memphis, I can remember every Saturday morning it was a big deal. At 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, Mid-South Wrestling came on. And it was big stuff. You know, we'd watch wrestling for a couple hours, and then we'd go out in the yard and we'd pretend to be our heroes. We probably left with some limps at the end of the day, and probably would hurt a lot worse now if we tried to do some of the things they did. But, you know, this was back before this was real. We didn't know it was for show. These guys were really beating up on each other. This is cool stuff. And there was names like Jerry Lawler and the Superfly, Jimmy Snuka, he was one of my favorites, and Roddy Piper, and yeah, you're going, I don't want to admit that I know some of this stuff. But it was a cool thing to do. It was, you know, we didn't sit on our video games and play wrestling. We watched it, and then we went outside and did it. I could go somewhere with that, but I won't. All the kids are in children's church. But I saw this week, I guess Tuesday or Wednesday, I saw a name pop up in a headline that one of those guys that I used to watch on Sunday morning had passed away. Dusty Rhodes. I don't know if you remember that name or not. He was one of those guys we'd watch on Saturday mornings and went on. Well, WWF was the World Wrestling Federation. I don't know if you remember that or not. That's their logo. I stole their logo this morning. Don't tell anybody. But I'm going to propose to you this morning that doesn't stand for WWF. It stands for something else. Seeing Dusty, or seeing the fact that he passed away, made me think about those wrestling days. Made me think about the fun that we would have watching that. And weird how your mind wanders sometimes and how you think about stuff and you make connections and put things together. Well, I started thinking about that wrestling concept. And you know, there's one in the Bible that got into a pretty serious wrestling match. We're going to talk about him this morning, Jacob. How many of you have had that 2 o'clock in the morning experience or 3 o'clock in the morning experience where you wake up and you're just gut-wrenched over something that God's doing or something that just doesn't make sense? And you'd really love to go back to sleep, but you can't because you're wrestling with him over it. And it just doesn't make sense. Or you get that phone call in the morning to learn of some tragedy that you're just like, really? And you wrestle with it. You know, I would say that we still wrestle with God quite a bit, if we're honest with ourselves. It's okay to say that we wrestle with God. You know, it's okay to question Him. It's okay to ask Him, hey, what do you mean with this? It's okay to ask Him why things are happening. It's okay to ask Him what exactly it is He's trying to tell us. That's okay. Well, I'm going to propose to you that WWF doesn't stand for World Wrestling Federation, but it stands for Wrestling with the Father. How about that? So keep that in your mind as we talk about Jacob this morning. Turn over to Genesis chapter 32 with me. The end of chapter 32. We're just going to read his story of wrestling. And there's some events in Jacob's life that led up to this event before he ever gets to the point where he meets this fellow in the middle of the night. Jacob was not a nice person. Jacob was kind of he had the little brother syndrome, I think. He'd cause the problems and then leave. Anybody here a little brother or a little sister? Yeah, that was you, wasn't it? That was me. I'm the little brother, I'll admit it. I can remember those days that I would do stuff and they would get in trouble for it. It was kind of cool. That's kind of Jacob. He's the instigator. And Jacob had this experience one night that we're going to read about. Changed his life forever. You know, it's okay to wrestle with God. Sometimes we need to wrestle with Him Because sometimes we need to understand some things. Sometimes we need Him to shake us to get us to understand. That's what happens with Jacob. Read with me here in verse 32. In fact, why don't you stand while we read? Verse 22. During the night, it doesn't say it was 2 a.m, but that's when it happens in my house. I don't know about yours. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons and crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob all alone in the camp. It's awful lonely at 2 a.m, isn't it? And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of his socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked, and he replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of his injury to his hip. Even today, the people of Israel don't eat the tendon near the hip socket because of what happened that night when the man strained the tendon of Jacob's hip. You can be seated. Jacob had a pretty interesting night. Jacob had a rough night. I doubt that he woke up the next morning refreshed. Isn't it nice to get a good night's sleep sometimes? And you wake up and you go, "How did I do that? I'd sure like to do it again tonight." Those seem to happen more often. But Jacob had one of those nights that was probably just a rough night. And it probably was at the same time a night that was refreshing. Now he woke up with some pain, I'm sure, because he'd been fighting all night long. And he had a hip that was out of socket now, so he had a limp, and that can't be comfortable. What was God's point in all this? What's he trying to do to Jacob here? Well, you know, I'll wrestle with the boys sometimes, and it gets kind of crazy. We'll wrestle in the living room, and it ain't as easy as it used to be. It kind of hurts, as a matter of fact, now sometimes. They're bigger and I'm older. That's not a good combination. But I always know that I have the upper hand if I want to. Wonder if Jacob ever felt during the night like he was the underhanded one. Wonder if Jacob ever felt during the night like he was never going to win this. We'll get to that here in just a second. But I know how worn out I get wrestling with my boys. And I have no doubt that this week at camp there'll probably be some wrestling in the swimming pool. There'll probably be some wrestling in the dorm rooms that I'll have to go break up. There'll probably be some wrestling out in the Gaga ball pits, and if you don't know what Gaga ball is, that's okay. You don't really want to know. It's a fun game. I call it bloody knuckle ball because by the end of the week, everybody's knuckles are going to be skin up. I'm sure there'll be some wrestling matches out there we'll have to go break up. But can you imagine actually a physical, hands-on combat wrestling match with God? Do you think? I try not to. Do you think you might be a little tired the next day? Do you think you might be a little bit worn out? Imagine this is probably where Jacob's at. Worn out. Man, what happened to me last night? I just can't go. My hip hurts. I'm beat. Literally. This is a weird verse in some ways too, as a matter of fact. It's confusing in some ways. It makes you think in some other ways. One scholar even says that this verse raises more questions than it does give answers. And I might tend to agree with that in some ways because it does raise some questions. Who is this man? Is it really God? Why in the world would he pick a fight? What exactly is going on here? What's changing here? Well, there's 3 or 4 things that I want us to see in this event with what happened with Jacob here. And I want you to think about this while we're talking about Jacob. What are you wrestling with? What are you and God going around and round about? What are you going at? Are you in round number 3? Are you in round number 4? Are you waiting for him to pin you down and go to the 3 count? Or do you raise your shoulder just in time? What is it that you're wrestling with right now? Think about that as we go through this, because I'll almost promise you there's a point to whatever the fight is. There's a point to why God has you where he has you. I could share with you some things that I'm wrestling with. I could share with you some things that my family's wrestling with. We could probably have a testimony service and all of us share what we're wrestling. But all of us are wrestling with something. Listen to what some lessons are here with Jacob. First of all, I think we need to see that this fight was necessary. This fight kind of had to happen. Did you notice that Jacob's not the one that started the fight? He was taking care of his family. Actually, he was getting his family out of town because he was afraid there was going to be a fight. But it was with his brother. It wasn't with God. But Jacob didn't initiate this fight. It says that the man approached him. You could say by all accounts, God's picking the fight on Jacob. Well, that's not fair. Why is he picking a fight on me? He's going to win. That's pretty obvious. He's all powerful. I'm nothing. So why is God picking the fight on Jacob? I can't answer that question. Why did God allow Jacob to hold on to him? Why did God allow Jacob to almost win? Why did God not just destroy Jacob? Do you not think he has that ability? Well, sure he does if he's all powerful. Why would God pick a fight? I can't answer that question, but I can tell you this. It's obviously something that God wanted to do for a reason. Have you ever looked at the situations that you find yourself in life in and ask, God, am I going through this for a reason? Are you trying to teach me something here? Is there a lesson that I'm supposed to learn? You know, I learned when Mom passed away that changed my perspective on life probably forever. Because, you know, up until then, life had been pretty good. The first 36 years, I was cruising. No problems. Everything's great. And then suddenly it's not so great. Suddenly you have to deal with this major life event. And I learned through all of that and several things that begin to happen in succession there with other things in life, that maybe in the things that God takes us to, maybe in those wrestling matches, he's got something for me to learn. So, you know, my prayer became out of that, and it has been for probably just about every day the last 4 years. Okay, God, I'm getting up today. What is it that you want to teach me today? I don't try to avoid the lessons anymore. I don't try to avoid the wrestling match. You know, the tag team matches where your partner's in the ring and you can tap out, and I guess that's a whole different sport altogether, tapping out. But you can tag and get your partner in. Man, wouldn't it be nice sometimes in life if you could reach up and tag your partner and let them come take your place and deal with whatever the wrestling match is that you're dealing with? Amen. We don't really have that luxury, though. But I learned maybe that's not God's intention, is to pawn it off on somebody else. Maybe his intention is for me to go through it so I'll learn something. Maybe his intention is to teach me because I need to teach somebody else. Maybe his intention is to give me a little bit of practice here because he knows I'm going to need it later. Whatever the case is, God did this on purpose. He had a purpose for fighting with Jacob. It was the night before Jacob was going to be the reunion with his brother Esau, and you know that story. Not exactly a good brother, Jacob. Stole his brother's blessing. I wonder if he's worried about that reunion. I wonder if he's worried what's going to come. So Jacob was actually going to face the music, so to speak, the next day when God takes care of him the night before. You ever been in a situation where you know you got to do something tomorrow that you're just kind of dreading? Everybody shake your head this way. You ever been in a situation where you know you got to do something this afternoon that you're just kind of dreading? I'm not saying I'm dreading going to camp. Don't hear me say that. But we've all been there. It doesn't put you in exactly the best frame of mind, does it? Kind of wears you down a little bit. Makes you vulnerable in some ways. That's where God found Jacob. He's worried about tomorrow because he's going to meet his brother. He's afraid of the meeting. It's not going to be a good meeting. And that's where God comes to him and wrestles with him. He's already got him beat down. Going to beat him down a little bit more. kind of hard to find joy in times like that, isn't it? Kind of hard to enjoy times like that. But sometimes those are the things that are absolutely needed. You may be saying sometimes, we wrestle with God over a problem that we just don't understand. I don't understand why I lost my job, God. This doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why you're asking us to move halfway across the country to another town. That doesn't make sense. I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand. You ever had one of those problems that you don't understand? That you've wrestled with? Maybe you're there today. Maybe it's a problem of wrestling with God over His will in your life. Let me tell you, I've wrestled with that one a lot over the last 7 years. Because I can tell you, it's a whole lot easier to go get in an airplane and fly a bunch of people from point A to point B. A whole lot easier. It doesn't rain near as much when you're up above the clouds. Don't know if you've ever noticed that. But when you're down below the clouds in the weeds, you get wet sometimes. It'd be a whole lot easier to sit in the pew and listen to somebody preach. It'd be a whole lot easier to just mix in with the crowd and do whatever the church does. But that's not where God's got me. But it's a hard thing to accept sometimes. Are you wrestling with what His will is in your life today? You might be on the edge of doing something big. You might be on the edge of stepping out and doing something that scares you to death. But it's His will. I understand that wrestling. Maybe you're wrestling with God because of questions that haunt you. Anybody have any of those questions? Something that just doesn't make sense. I'll tell you my favorite one. How in the world can you let good things or bad things happen to good people? Do you wrestle with questions like that? Maybe. Or maybe you're wrestling with God because you're looking for a blessing. God, it's been a long time since I've felt you. It's been a long time since I've seen you working in my life. It's been a long time since I've seen something good come to my family. Now, you sure are blessing the family down the road. Would you look at the house they built? Would you look at the new car they're driving? Would you look at their kids? All of them have master's degrees. Man, you're blessing them. Where's mine? It's a fair thing to say that we wrestle with stuff like that. Would you like to have a blessing from God today? Amen? Do you ever wrestle with that? God, where are you? God, why not me? Where's my blessing? Do you know there's lots of promises in the Bible that if we would just not give up, we will see those blessings? If we would just not give up, we'll eventually have those answers. If we would just not give up, things will eventually make sense. Think about the prayer of Jabez. She just kept praying. She never gave up. There's a parable in Luke, the unjust ruler. Do you remember him? The unjust judge, where the woman just keeps nagging him and nagging him and nagging him and nagging him to help her out. And he finally says, okay, fine. If you'll just be quiet, I'll help you. And Jesus uses it to teach His disciples, don't ever give up. This man is an unjust man, and he still eventually did the right thing. Do you not think your God, who is a just God, will do the right thing when His people pray, when His people seek Him? Yeah, they will. Don't give up. Or in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus, there's a pretty famous painting of it. I'm wondering if the artist was really there painting it when it happened. No, he wasn't. But there's a pretty famous rendition of it where, Jesus is at the door knocking. And what does it say? Ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened unto you. And then we add the tag to it, singing, Alleluia, Alleluia. You know that song? What's that song telling us? What's that verse telling us? It's telling us don't give up. What you're wrestling with may be something necessary in your life for us to learn something. But don't give up seeking. Don't give up the fight. Keep on keeping on, whatever it is. Don't give up until you get the answer. Jacob didn't give up. It says they were still fighting in the morning. Matter of fact, Jacob says, I'm going to let go unless you bless me. Hey, if Jacob can pray it, I guess we can pray it too. God, I'm going to hold on to you, and I ain't let go of you till you bless me. That's a fair prayer. That's a fair wrestling match. Maybe we need a blessing. Maybe we need that answer. It was another thing. It was a humbling experience. There's still that thought of physically wrestling with God. You know, there's not a lot of people in the Bible that it says actually saw God. There's not a whole lot of people in the Bible that it says walked with God or were even in any kind of communion personally with God. In fact, when we see Jesus do it in the Transfiguration, it's so blinding that the disciples can't even see it. It's so bright. And here we are in the middle of the night, and Jacob's wrestling with him. You know what that tells me? That God can come to you wherever you are, however you need him, and be right there with you. He came to Jacob in the middle of the night. I can imagine it was pretty humbling. I don't know about you, but sometimes those 2 a.m. wrestling matches are pretty humbling. When you realize I've laid here for 3 hours and I still don't have the answer. When you've prayed for 3 hours and you feel like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling and coming right back at you. You ever been there? That's kind of humbling, isn't it? When you wrestled with God all night and here you are in the morning and you haven't won the fight. God's not tired yet, but we are. It's still, that thought of wrestling with God just still kind of blows my mind. Some of you may be wondering here, how do you even know this was God? It doesn't say so specifically. Kind of infers it. It doesn't say so specifically, but look at some of the instances. Look at some of the descriptions. In verse 25, it says, a man crippled Jacob with just a touch. Have you ever known a man that could just touch you and cripple you? No. But I know a man that can touch and heal. That same man's touch can do a lot of things. It says with just a touch, that Jacob was crippled. Jacob is asking in verse 26 a man for a blessing. Have you ever come to a person and asked them for a blessing? Oh, sure, you may come to someone and ask for some help that leads to a blessing, but there's really only one that can bless. And he does the blessing through us sometimes, but it's still God that does the blessing. I think that's an important lesson for our society today because it's looking for blessings in a lot of different places. But there's only one that it can come from. And you know what? He wants us to wrestle with him. Think about that. This stranger in verse 29, he wouldn't tell Jacob his name, but he spoke with some pretty serious authority. There's no doubting that in this passage. You and I can try to speak with all the authority we want, but any authority that I can possibly claim to have is still God's word. We have no authority outside of that. To speak that way and not be God, that's pretty dangerous. Verse 30, we see Jacob obviously understood who it was, because what does he say? I have seen God face to face. Some Bible scholars will call this what they call a theophany. Have you ever heard that? That's one of the big technical theological words that's worth about 2 cents. Can't even buy a cup of coffee with it. But it means God in human form. God's appeared in other ways. He appeared in a bush that was burning. He talked through a donkey. Do you not think he could appear to Jacob in the middle of the night and wrestle with him? Sure. I wonder if he brought the ropes with him too and bounced him off the ropes and body slammed him a time or two. You can let your imagination run wild. Why not? But what a humbling experience of Jacob to wrestle with God himself. We've all been there. It's pretty humbling to realize that here at the end of the night, I'm still me. I still don't have the answer. God had to humble Jacob. I was talking about wrestling with the boys. I have no doubt in my mind if I wanted to beat them, I could. I'm bigger than they are. I'm stronger than they are. But guess who always wins? It's not me. It's one of them. But boy, if they needed a humble lesson, how humbling would it be for me to prove to them that I could win? How humbling would it be to me if they actually did win? Jacob needed to be humbled. Sometimes the wrestling match that we deal with is the fact that we need to be humbled. Have you ever thought about that? God, what is the lesson that you're trying to teach me through this? I'm trying to teach you that you're getting way too far ahead of yourself, and you're getting way too big for yourself, and you think you're something that you're not. You need to put me back in front where I belong. That might be the wrestling match that we're dealing with. That might be the lesson, is God saying, listen, you got this backwards again. You know, you read all through the Bible. Bob mentioned it this morning, talking in the Old Testament, going through the Chronicles and, well, backing up to Kings and Judges and going all through the Old Testament. It's a rise and fall of people being in line with God and then thinking, I can do this on my own, and falling away from Him and getting themselves ahead of Him. And God reminding them, hey, you need to be humbled. Here's how I'm going to do it. I am thankful that God doesn't humble us the way He did some of them. It would be ugly. But maybe that's the lesson for us. Maybe we need to come to a place today where we need to humble ourselves to get some things back in line. Maybe those 2 o'clock in the morning wrestling matches will go away. Jacob needed to be humbled. Third thing is this. It was a life-changing experience. You do not encounter God. You do not wrestle with God and not experience a life-changing event. It just doesn't happen. Why would you want it to be any other way? Think about that. If what I was doing was leading me to a point where I needed that humbling experience and where I needed Him to come and meet me face to face and teach me something, why would I want to go back to what I was doing? Wouldn't I want life to change? Wouldn't I want something to be different? Wouldn't I want Him to fill me with whatever it is He's got in store for me and let me follow Him instead of me trying to drag Him along? You ever tried to drag God along? It doesn't work real well, does it? He somehow has a way of getting Himself back in front, one way or the other. We all know that eventually we'll admit that He's in front. Just hope we can do it now and today. Jacob's life was changed forever in this experience. First of all, his name was changed. His name was Jacob. You know, God's good at this. Jesus did this to a few guys too, changing their names to be something that He wanted them to be, changing their name to be something that He expected them to be. Do you know what the name Jacob actually means? This is kind of funny. Anybody ever researched names in the Bible? The name Jacob actually means a usurper or a grabber. Do you remember how Jacob was born? Holding on to his brother's heel. His whole life he's trying to pull his brother back and get ahead of him. The usurper, the instigator, the troublemaker, so to speak. That's Jacob. And through this experience and his humbleness and his willing to come to a place where he sees who God is and he's asking God to bless him, God Himself says, I'm going to change your name. From now on, you won't be called Jacob. You will be called Israel. Why? Because you fought with God and with men and have won. Doesn't mean he got God down for the 3 count. That doesn't mean he came off the top rope and pile drived God. It's not what that means. That means he came to a place where he was humbled to a point where he realized who God was and realized how he needed Him and held on until God blessed him. Sometimes that's what we need to do. The blessing may just be right around the corner, but you let go too soon. The blessing may come at the 7 o'clock hour in the morning, but you gave up the fight at 6:30. You ever been there? You don't know because you gave up too soon. You ever been in one of those situations where you realize that had I not had to turn around and go back and get my keys, I would have probably been the car that was in that wreck? Or you realize, oops, I had to pull over on the side of the road for a second to adjust something, and then get back on the road, only to realize that that car that is now ahead of you that was behind you is the one that caused the problems, and you would have been right there with them. You ever have one of those experiences? we'll call them coincidences. I wonder if it works the other way, where if we would have just held on a little bit longer, we might have seen the blessing. If we had just not given up quite so soon because I got tired, I can't pray anymore, I can't wear the paint off the ceiling anymore because I feel like that's all I'm doing. Well, maybe we needed to wear the paint just a little bit more so there was a hole in the ceiling so the prayer actually went through. And we just gave up a little too soon. But Jacob held on. I'm not letting go until you bless me. That was his words. You ever been that stern with God? Have you ever had that much faith in him to know that you could hold on until he blessed? His word says that he will if we'll just hold on. Do you know what Israel means? Israel means a prince with God. You've gone from being a troublemaker to being one that I'll call prince. You've gone from being one that my church is named after. You're Israel. Others will call you Father. Others will look up to you. You will do amazing things because you trusted enough in me to hold on until I blessed you. Maybe that's where some of us are at today. We just need to hold on a little bit longer and see what that blessing is. See what the answer is. See what the outcome is. See what it is that God's trying to teach us. You know, a funny thing happens. If you keep reading in chapter 33, Jacob goes on to meet his brother, and it's not a bad meeting at all. Matter of fact, his brother's glad to see him. Peace is made. I wonder if the peace would have been the same if Jacob had given up just a little bit too early in the middle of the night when he was wrestling. We don't know. You know why? Because he did hold on. We talk about aircraft accident investigations, and you know they call them black boxes, but they're always orange, that have the voice recorders and the flight data recorders. I've always wondered, why don't they just build the whole airplane out of that stuff? That always survives the crash. But it records the last 30 minutes or so of any conversation that's going on in the cockpit. And when we're talking about, crew type stuff, I'll always tell students, do you know why you never hear the chain that broke the accident on the voice recordings? It's because the accident never happens because somebody spoke up. So you never get a chance to hear it. We don't know what would have happened if Jacob would have let go because he didn't. He held on. And we see his blessing. I don't want to wake up tomorrow and miss what my blessing is because I let go too early. That's what I'm trying to say. Sometimes I feel like in this crazy society that we live in, we kind of get this I don't care attitude. Would anybody admit that you've got that this morning? And we feel like, what's the point? The rest of the world doesn't care. What's the point? The last 15 people I invited to church, I hadn't seen them sitting in the pew. Well, maybe the 16th one is the one that would show up. But they'll never get the chance because I gave up at 15. Maybe I'm not getting the blessing because I gave up too soon. Don't be that way. Be like Jacob. I know a young man, well, he used to be a young man, that wrestled with God over a call. That wrestled with God over something that God wanted him to do. So much so to the point that he almost completely turned his back and walked away. So much so to the point that he would have been willing to give up everything that he knew of this to not have to deal with this. I wonder where that guy would be today instead of standing in a pulpit in front of you. Sometimes the wrestling match is not easy. Most of the time, the one that we're fighting is bigger than us. But unfortunately, we give up the fight way too soon. Don't give up. Just hold on. Be like Jacob. What's the blessing that's waiting right around the corner if we'll just go around the corner? This hallway's too long. I can't get to the corner. Really? Take another step. See what happens. Pray another amen. See what happens. Hold on another day. See what happens. Wrestle just a little bit longer and see what happens. Maybe God's trying to teach us something. Maybe He's trying to humble you for something. Maybe He's got a blessing that He just wants you to be patient to get to. Let me ask you a couple of questions this morning. Maybe you're not dealing with anything, but maybe God's got something He wants you to deal with. Do you need to wrestle with something, with God about something this morning? Or does God need to wrestle with you about something this morning? Has He been poking at you about something? Has He been working on your heart about something? Have you been kind of pushing it off? Don't. You might be missing the blessing of it. You might be missing the blessing in it. What's He doing to you? What's He doing for you? What's He doing in you? What's He wanting you to do for Him? Stand with me this morning. Is there a blessing that you need? Is there a question that you need answered? Is there a problem that you need to make sense? Is there a reassurance that you need, something in life? Is there just a plain old presence of God that you need this morning? I'm going to just encourage you. Hold on just a little bit longer. Don't give up on Him, and I promise you, He won't give up on you. Whatever it is, wherever you're at, whatever you're dealing with. And know that, yeah, bad things happen to good people. I still don't understand it. But what I can tell you is I can see God's hand working in almost every single one of them. Not almost, in every single one of them. And I can see God doing something for His glory and to the betterment of somebody. Maybe you're one of those good people that's dealing with a bad thing right now. I don't know. I don't know what your wrestling match is. But you know it's okay to wrestle with the Father. But don't give up until you get your answer. Hold on until you get what it is that you're looking for. He's right there for you. I don't want any music. I just want to invite you. And it may not even be something, I'm not even talking some earth-shattering. You don't have to come to these altars for salvation. You understand that, don't you? Maybe you're just trying to figure out what the lesson is that God's trying to teach you today. Maybe you're just trying to figure out, God, where's my blessing? If that's the case, would you be willing to just come up here for a minute and just to acknowledge to Him, I hear you today, God, and I'm not going to give up on you. I hear you, and I'm going to listen. I hear you, and I'm going to hold on, even if my fingers turn white and my hands fall asleep, until I get that answer or I get that blessing from you. Would you be willing to come and just spend a minute with Him? I'm just going to be quiet and let you spend a minute or two with Him this morning.